Hello, ladies. Welcome to our Sunday Bhagavatam group. And today we will be reading and discussing from Canto 1, Chapter 15, verses 28 to 30. So we can say our opening prayers together. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Nice, so I'll share my screen with you. You can read the verses. Can you all see? Okay, great. Text 28. Sūta Gosvāmī said, thus being deeply absorbed in thinking of the instructions of the Lord, which were imparted in the great intimacy of friendship, and thinking of his lotus feet, Arjuna's mind became pacified and free from all material contamination. Arjuna's constant remembrance of the lotus feet of Lord Sri Krishna rapidly increased his devotion. And as a result, all the trash in his thoughts subsided. Because of the Lord's pastimes and activities, and because of his absence, it appeared that Arjuna forgot the instructions left by the Personality of Godhead. But factually, this was not the case. And again, he became Lord of his senses. So we will read the purport for text 29. Vasudevangriyanudhyana pariburnhitaranghasa bhaktya nirmatitashesha kashaya dishanorjuna. Arjuna's constant remembrance of the lotus feet of Lord Sri Krishna rapidly increased his devotion, and as a result, all the trash in his thoughts subsided. Purport. Material desires in the mind are the trash of material contamination. By such contamination, the living being is faced with so many compatible and incompatible things that discourage the very existence of spiritual identity. Birth after birth, the conditioned soul is entrapped with so many pleasing and displeasing elements, which are all false and temporary. They accumulate due to our reactions to material desires, but when we get in touch with the transcendental Lord in his variegated energies by devotional service, the naked forms of all material desires become manifest, and the intelligence of the living being is pacified in its true color. As soon as Arjuna turned his attention toward the instructions of the Lord, as they are inculcated in the Bhagavad-gita, his true color of eternal association with the Lord became manifest, and thus he felt free from all material contaminations. Jai, I'll stop the screen share there. Om Jnana-timirantasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuranmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So this purport is relatable. Material desires in the mind are the trash of material contamination. By such contamination, so the word contamination, what does that mean if you're contaminated? It means you're dirty. It means your mind is filled with gross, yucky things that you don't want. The material contamination in general is not just the mind, it's also our actions, because our actions stem from the consciousness and the thoughts that we cultivate. So the things we meditate on eventually become our actions. And then when we have a contaminated mind, then we engage our resources, which in our case is our bodies, because we're humans and we have bodies. And actually humans have a lot of potency. We have a lot of potential compared to other forms of life. like certain animals, they have a lot of potential in one specific sphere. So like certain carnivorous beasts, they're really good at running and killing, or another type of animal might be really good at building, but they don't have a lot of range. Animals really, they can't necessarily form the kind of large scale civilizations that humans can. And animals are much less likely to destroy the planet, for example. And so humans, with our bodies and with this potency that we've been gifted in this lifetime, or that we've earned through our karma, whatever you want to say, if our minds are contaminated, then our actions, when we go out and enter the world, we will use our bodies and our power in contaminated ways. And we will go out and contaminate the world to the extent that we have these dirty, yuck, contaminated things, desires, neuroses, problems, issues going on in our minds. And it's funny, I didn't actually intend to start on such a negative note, but just reading Prabhupada's purport again, it just jumps right at you to really reflect on this concept of contamination. And if you think about it, if you're familiar with Krishna's teachings in the Bhagavad-gita and with the teachings of the Bhagavatam, the purpose of human life is to cultivate spiritual life and to be able to distinguish spirit from matter, to understand our true identity as an eternal spiritual soul, and to basically, through that knowledge, which is basically only available to the human being, it's available to everyone once they cycle through and work through their other karma. But once you get to the stage of human being, that is the specific place where this knowledge is available. And the purpose of the knowledge is to no longer identify with that contamination. The contamination is going to be there. And when we no longer identify with it, then the contamination actually begins to subside, because we're no longer cultivating that contamination. And there's an interesting line in here. See if I can find it. Soul entrapped. Oh, yeah, it's the rest of the same sentence. By such contamination, the living being is faced with so many compatible and incompatible things that discourage the very existence of spiritual identity. I found that line profound. Let's see. Okay, there's some audio distortion, so I'm just going to take my headphones out. Please. Can everyone hear me? Awesome. Okay, so this line, the living being is faced with so many compatible and incompatible things that discourage the very existence of spiritual identity. Wow, so our spiritual identity is being discouraged by these things. Why is it being discouraged by things? It says compatible and incompatible, so that's kind of counterintuitive that something compatible would discourage our spiritual identity. Because if you think about it, you can interpret that line differently. Sometimes, like in the Upadeshamrita,
Rupa Goswami talks about accepting what's favorable for devotional service and rejecting what's unfavorable. So basically, accept what's compatible and reject what's incompatible. But in this case, it's talking about compatible things which still discourage the existence of our spiritual identity. So clearly that is indicating things that are compatible with our material desires. And so whether something is compatible with our material desires or it's incompatible with our material desires, it still is discouraging the very existence of spiritual identity. And why is that? Because we are drawn like a magnet, we are drawn to identify with those things instead of our spirit. And whether they are pleasing or displeasing to us is kind of irrelevant, because either way, we're getting a rasa there. And so we're seeking rasa through a specific method. We've basically cultivated this method of getting what the soul really needs. The soul actually needs rasa. The soul needs pleasure. The soul needs activity. And we have cultivated the material method of meeting our needs. And so if we don't interrupt that process and that pattern and that method, then we really are not going to be able to desist. We're not going to be able to have complete control over, whether we're a good person in the world or a bad person in the world. We have some control over it, but we see Krishna teaches in the Bhagavad-gita, even if you cultivate so much goodness, eventually you reach higher planets, you evolve your form to become a deva, a god in a heavenly realm, and enjoy, right? And you enjoy, and through the enjoyment, we eventually lose interest, or our attention gets diverted, or we basically use up all of our good karma and we didn't have great intentions to begin with. And so we fall down. So even cultivating goodness in this world, it's very risky. And Krishna tells us that it doesn't really work. It's not permanent. So we need to get our needs met. And the only way to permanently get our needs met is through cultivating the spiritual identity that Krishna talks about in Bhagavad-gita. And so I'll continue reading Prabhupada's purport because it's short and I think it's brilliant. They accumulate due to our reactions to material desires. But when we get in touch with the Transcendental Lord and his variegated energies by devotional service, the naked forms of all material desires become manifest. And the intelligence of the living being is pacified in its true color. The naked forms, I love this. If you think of the story of the demon Putana who came to see Krishna in a disguise, right? And as soon as Krishna contacts her, so she's offering her breast as sort of a surrogate, he's a little baby, I'm a lady, you can suck my breast. And of course it's laced with poison, so she's trying to kill him. And baby Krishna, when he contacts her by sucking her breast, he basically, well, I guess you could say he sucks out her contamination, but she can no longer maintain her beautiful illusory form when she gets into contact with Krishna. And so that is apparently what's happening here. When the naked forms of all material desires become manifest, it's because we've gotten in touch with Krishna by devotional service, and we start to just look around and see everything exactly as it is once we cultivate that knowledge. And I find that language of the naked form to be compelling, because if you think of just being naked, if you if you're not very attractive, or you have some like something on your body that you don't want everyone to see, or whatever it is, I mean, in the world in general, you can just go cover it up with clothes. You can cover it up with so many things. You can go look nice. No one needs to know what your body actually looks like. That's not necessary. But if for some reason, you were forced to be naked, it's like clothes aren't going to help, and it's the same with the things that we not so much a literal nakedness, but when we become attracted to something, or let's say to a person, there are all of these endorphins and hormones that we are subject to that actually blind our intelligence when we fall in love, for example, or we fall into an infatuation with a person or a thing or whatever it is. There's just chemistry happening in our brains that does not allow us to see the real picture. And so we can make all kinds of decisions based on that illusory form of the situation. And then at a certain point, the chemicals wear off. And, in one example, you might even find that you've gotten into a relationship with someone, or you've gotten married to someone, or you've gotten involved with some job or some other situation. And after some time, the chemicals wear off, things settle down, and all of a sudden, that person or that situation is actually sitting in front of you, and you realize, oh, they're not so shiny anymore. They actually have all of these problems that I didn't know about before. And actually, maybe I did know about them, but I didn't even think that they mattered. And so we have this happen all the time. And to read Prabhupada's last sentence, as soon as Arjuna turned his attention toward the instructions of the Lord, as they are inculcated in the Bhagavad-gita, his true color of eternal association with the Lord became manifest, and thus he felt freed from all material contaminations. So his true color of eternal association with the Lord became manifest. And it's interesting because Prabhupada uses the word manifest twice in this purport. Before, he talked about the naked forms of material desires becoming manifest, and now his true color of eternal association with the Lord becomes manifest. And that's beautiful because, okay, true color, he actually uses true color twice again. That's so interesting. So earlier he says, and the intelligence of the living being is pacified in its true color. So when we contact the naked forms of material desires, because we've cultivated devotional service and now our intelligence actually works, it's actually a beautiful thing. I mean, at first it could be painful if we still hold some attachment, or we feel grief, for what we could have done better, or what we could have cultivated. But actually, it is reassuring to see things as they are. Intelligence is actually reassuring. And the true color of eternal association becoming manifest. So this is powerful because what I actually wanted to talk about for this verse was not all of the material contamination and how we're dirty and all of that. Wasn't my intention. It was just divine inspiration. What I really wanted to talk about was something that was mentioned in text 28, which was Sūta Gosvāmī says, thus being deeply absorbed in thinking of the instructions of the Lord, which were imparted in the great intimacy of friendship, and in thinking of his lotus feet, Arjuna's mind became pacified and free from all material contamination. So that's really the beautiful conclusion here. So after realizing that there's all of this negativity that we're cultivating. There's pathology that we're cultivating. But actually, there's a solution, and we can get our needs met in a way that is fully, deeply, and completely satisfying, and is eternal, and is not degrading to us. That is actually uplifting, and that truly changes us, because we no longer will be identifying with that grasping tendency of the material world. We'll be fully satisfied within ourselves. And we can see here that Krishna is inviting us into the intimacy of friendship, which is such a beautiful thing. And in the Bhagavad-gita, Krishna is inviting us repeatedly into that intimacy. Actually, I had a few verses pulled up. These are non-literal translations, but the highest yogi adores Krishna with faith. Those free of duality adore Krishna with firm vows. Krishna abides in those who adore him with devotion. Krishna illuminates the path to liberation for those who adore him with love. One who knows Krishna as the ultimate person knows everything and adores him with all one's being. And so these are the types of instructions that are being referred to in these verses. So in this section of the Bhagavatam, when Arjuna is dejected and he has to remember the instructions of Krishna, these are the types of instructions. Krishna is specifically inviting us into his rasa, into friendship with him, into love with him, into association with him, and into intimacy. And again, to go back to Upadeshamrita, Rupa Goswami talks about how to cultivate intimacy. So we're exchanging gifts, we're taking prasadam together, we're opening our hearts to each other. And Arjuna was actually doing that directly with Krishna. And so imagine him remembering that, and remembering Krishna's invitation to him on the battlefield to take shelter in that completely. Because when Arjuna actually sees the universal form of Krishna, Vishnu, Brahman, the Supreme Lord, source of everything, source of all death and destruction and beauty and everything. When Arjuna actually sees that, he can't even believe that he was sharing intimacy with Krishna. He apologizes for it. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe I was calling you cousin, brother. I made fun of you. I teased you. And he's just like, I can't believe I did that. And so for us to look at Arjuna and think, wow, he shared this intimacy directly with Krishna. That's amazing. That's unbelievable. It was actually unbelievable for Arjuna too, once he found out who Krishna actually was, or once he was reminded. So just to wrap up here, when Prabhupada talks about the true color of the soul, there's something important to remember, to end on a positive note, since I spent so much time talking about the trash of our minds. Our true color means it's actually our natural self, our real self. So our true color is sharing existence with God, sharing intimacy, and sharing a universe with God and all other beings. So last night, my guru was giving a talk, and he was responding to some theological points. And some philosophers say that we can't even use the same language as God, We can't even use the same language for God as we do for ordinary things, because God is so separate. And this is kind of a radical dualism that our line, the Chaitanya line, doesn't really accept. Because actually that sharing of language, the fact that God is the superlative of everything beautiful here, that actually gives us a type of intimacy because it's a way to relate. And even just the fact that God is sharing this universe with us is intimate. And what that points to is that we are actually pure souls. We are going back to God because that's where we're from. That's who we really are. And in an effort to be kind of very pious or self-effacing, we shouldn't forget the real theology of the Bhagavatam, which is that we actually belong with Krishna. That's where we're really from. And Krishna's not alone in the spiritual world. The spiritual universe is basically the primary place. It's the primary universe. And most souls are there, and most souls are pure. And we actually are pure too. And we're in this human form of life. We've made an effort. We've made an effort to contact Krishna again. We've decided to hear Bhagavatam. Most of us have cultivated some kind of spiritual discipline in our lives, even if we feel it's inadequate, even if it sometimes is just a small effort. Cultivating that discipline and making that endeavor to hear Bhagavatam means that, according to Krishna's own teachings, we are destined to be back with Krishna very soon. So I'll end there, and then we can begin our discussion.